And at the cove, there was a sort of village, only 3 or 4 cottages and some workshops, some sheds for pilchard fishing. And they did a little bit of pilchard fishing here, but eventually Cadgwith to prove, too strong a lure, and so everybody eventually abandoned this and went over to Cadgwith, and this cove was left pretty much empty. So that's all my preamble. It's a lovely walk to the top of the deep dive, so we'll press on and do that. You're in the Serpentine area of the Lizard, so you're finding stone everywhere in its natural state. Every stone you'll see probably from here to the cove is some form of serpentine, and it was used just commonly as building blocks, rough hewn, whatever like that. That's a blue serpentine, as you may be able to see a bit of.
Yes.
Yes, and so you're surrounded by this stuff. Okay. To say here, but that's the Brave cart track. Goodness knows what the horses and donkeys or whatever they went through, because they were carrying large blocks of serpentine down here, and then hopefully not carrying any of it back because they were going to sell it. But how they did it, how they didn't run away, what the horses went through, I can't imagine. But anyway, it went on for years and years and years, so it obviously worked. The left-hand building is actually a capstan house. That was here from the fishing days, as was, I think, the larger building, which was just a store and thing for the fishing trade, although it was later taken over by the Serpentine Company. So we're going down this way, and it's crumbling. So what made this enterprise possible in the 1840s was the fact of the stream, because that was the only motive power you could get, was by water turning a wheel. The stream, for those of you who are feeling adventurous, you can cross the bridge, go up there and turn right on the coast path, and you will actually see a very, very large area, sunken area, which was the reservoir. The first thing they did when they set up the works, build a dam, because that's what you need, the head of water, and then a series of launders and leats and everything else like that from the dam, sluice gates on the dam, come right across here and come to this feature on the right hand side here, which, as you'll shortly see, is where the wheel was. But before we do that, I'll just point out that building there behind, which I don't think that was a dwelling. I'm pretty sure it was probably where the final work of the carving and everything was done. It's quite spacious, but it's again, it's all built of serpentine blocks, but long gone. Now everything between here and the building there was full of workshops. You'll see in a minute, as you go down there, there's a small plaque on the left-hand side, which I've also got a copy of in my book if anybody wants to see it, and that shows the only illustration that was ever done of the layout of the buildings. Mostly at this end they were sort of galvanised sheds really, and as they went down they were bigger and better, and there was a different motive power when it finally got down to the bottom, which we'll see. But this is where the engine room was, if you like. The reservoir up there, and all the staging and everything else like that, to this wheel. Now the wheel this is steep as well. The wheel sat in here. It was made in Helston. It was a massive thing. It was 25 feet in diameter, but more impressive to me, it was 4 feet wide. So each little part of it was 4 feet wide. So it had a lot of heft in it, and it needed a lot of water to run it. It was overshot and discharged down back into the stream down there. And from here on, everything that had to be turned as machine-wise was fixed up to the heart of this here wheel. It lasted until the 1930s, the wheel, apparently, and it was still here, but it was still occasionally water went down and it started sort of clanking and going round and round.
Was it metal?
It was no, it wasn't. It wasn't all metal. Part of it was wood. The spokes were wood, and eventually, they decided that it was just too dangerous to leave it up any longer. So it was taken away and sold for scrap. Anyway, so as you come by, just take note of this. The illustration of what you're going to pass by. It was 2-story, and this area here goes down, so it would have had a first floor. Last one to look at this. This is a couple of illustrations of what it was like. Another picture of the wheel, I think, over there, over the page, isn't there? Yeah, that was the wheel.
Oh, that's huge.
And pass that around if you like. As it became more successful, and it was a very successful enterprise in its day, we'll talk about that in a minute, the wheel wouldn't do. The wheel wasn't enough. And times have moved on. So this whole area here had a static steam engine with a big chimney. Now, some ridiculous man who bought this place in the 1930s decided it was going to be an ideal holiday camp. So he came down here with some dynamite and knocked down an awful lot of it. You could just see one section of the chimney still there under the tree. See that round bit there?
Yes.
Yeah. And there's other bits under the undergrowth there. But this then became the engine room. And then this powered this, what I'm standing on, what you're just about to cross over, which was where they did the major cutting of the big blocks. And to do that, they needed obviously a level stand, and it was a very slow process. It was a saw that went very slow, fine-tooth saw that went like that for hours and hours and hours and hours, powered by whatever it was powered by the wheel or the steam engine. And as you see, when it got to the bottom, it didn't quite stop, and all these ridges were made after, by the saw. So that's probably the most alive sort of part of this that still remains, actually, and shows you what kind of work they did.
Wow.
Apparently they'd like to throw a bit of grit into the saw, but that helped it go on, so they'd take a bit of sand out of the pool or whatever. And this is where they did that kind of work. They did all sorts of stuff here. Over the years it was working. First of all, the Lizard didn't have an industry at all. It literally didn't. There was one copper mine which didn't last very long, but it wasn't blessed with minerals like the rest of Cornwall was, like the rest of West Cornwall was. So it didn't have any copper, it didn't have any tin. Serpentine wasn't very good land for growing things on, so it was regarded as the last place you'd want to live and fairly cursed, and fishing really was the only thing you could do. However, they did discover that these rocks were coloured, and they started digging them up, and they were a form of marble. Now, Britain doesn't have much in the way of marble, so that was a bit of a novelty. And so they started cutting it up, and then they started marketing it, and they marketed it as raw blocks and then sort of larger things, but mostly they didn't do any work here originally, because there was a Serpentine company had set itself up in Penzance what was the main building of the Werrytown mine in Penzance. If you know where Werrytown is, it's just that bit if you go along the promenade before you get to Newlyn, where the stream goes through. And so all over the Lizard, 9, 10, 11 quarries set themselves up, and they came down here and they put them on boats, because that was the only way. So Poltesco was just used for, Carline Cove was just used for transporting big blocks over to Penzance, where they were cut. They came to the attention of Prince Albert, who was very excited about it and got the Queen and the children to go and look around the works in Werrytown. He had the Great Exhibition of 1851 coming up. So Serpentine went up to the Great Exhibition of 1851 with his approval of the royal family, and certainly blocks then. It was beautiful carvings, lovely bowls, great big obelisks, and all sorts of things that they made here. And and that caught the attention of the rest of the great houses of England and churches, and so enormous demand grew up. And eventually, somebody, unnamed, we don't know who, twigged that instead of actually shipping all their stuff over to Penzance for it to be made into expensive items, why didn't they do it here? This is where the stone was. All it had to do is come down in blocks here, ship it in the back door, take it out the front. So they set up the Lizard Serpentine Company, and they set up as rivals of Penzance. And so they actually did a lot of fine work here, and everything from small stuff, inkstands and things like that, to fireplaces and sheet serpentine. For a while, parts of London were actually faced in sheets of red serpentine. And it was a major industry. And they constructed a jetty to go out there, because obviously it wasn't practical to load off the shore. And the jetty went out quite a long way, actually. Now, I'm not sure where Poltesco Rock is. Does anybody know? Anyway, there is a sort of underwater rock out there, which makes it a bit difficult in some tides anyway, but so it wasn't always terribly handy. But anyway, as boat transport was still the only transport for heavy goods, and so that's where it went. And so gradually all these sheds that you've seen illustrations for, they all set up, and they started producing stuff hand over fist. Penzance carried on doing stuff hand over fist as well, and for about 20 years it was a massive Cornish industry, almost to rival the tin and the copper, and employed, I think 57 men were employed down here, and I don't know how many in Penzance. So it was great, because before that the lizard men had mostly gone over to Penzance to work anyway during the week and had to come home at the weekends. They were delighted they could just go down the road and do the same job. So they both went head to head for a while. The marble industry didn't fall in love with it, mainly because they were importers. They imported their stuff from Italy and Spain and Portugal, and all the classic marbles that they like to deal with. And they did their best to give Serpentine a bad reputation, and said it weathered very easily. So, some of the local people said, would you like to come down and look at some of our church towers? Grade Church Tower, Mullion, and Wedner, all made out of serpentine, still looking pretty good after sort of 600 years, or whatever it is. So that didn't work. But the sheets of serpentine weren't a great success, because although serpentine does weather well, it hadn't had the extremes of hot and cold that you get in London, and it was actually cladding the Bank of England at one point, and traffic and vibration and all those things, and frost. Obviously, you don't get much of that here. So it started cracking, and they all went, yes, whoopee, the Serpentine's had it, but it hadn't. So Serpentine stopped making sheet stuff and carried on making works of art and large furniture, tabletops, things like that. And then, as the quarry, of course, the quarries didn't last forever, because we're standing in several square miles of serpentine, but very little of that is suitable for working. It's got to be the right consistency, the right colour, and it's got to cut well, but be steady. And people who know about serpentine know a good piece from a bad piece. Most of it is too hard to work. What you find on the shore, big boulders, they're far too hard. You can't work them. And so the quarries started running out one by one. And for a while it looked as if things were going to go quite badly. But then tourists started happening. In the later 19th century, tourists started discovering the lizard. And, each one thought they'd invented it. But all sorts of very well-known people, writers mostly, botanists who are very interested in the things like the lizard, special botany that it's got. They started coming, and so that spread. And then other tourists started coming. So obviously with ears cocked as Cornish people should be for a good trading opportunity, they started making smaller stuff. They started making stuff that you could actually carry away, because these works were quite, people used to come, make a point of actually coming here to look at this stuff, these works. And so they went down to making, much more handy-sized things. And at a certain point, a genius thought of, what we want now is a sort of something that's quite easily turned, but very appealing to people. And whoever it was, thought lighthouses. And so they started making lighthouses. And lighthouses were the mainstay of the Serpentine Industry, Penzance and here, for years and years, and still are. If you go to Lizard now, you'll still see plenty of lighthouses for sale. Originally they were quite small and had a little rough base, and then they became bigger and clever and different coloured serpentines in them, and then they started boring up hole up the middle and putting electric lights in the top of them and all sorts of stuff. But to people up country, that spoke of Cornwall, that spoke of the sea, and that was the ideal thing to take home to Granny, wherever she was. The railway came as far as Helston. It turned off the main line at Gwynier Road. Sadly not there anymore. I remember going on it very well. And Helston was only going to be the stopping place, and it was going to come all the way to the Lizard. You can imagine what a railway track that would have been, eh? It would have been amazing, but actually it might have completely ruined the Lizard for everybody, because people would have done it. So the GWR didn't actually do that. They decided it was too expensive, but they did run sort of coaching trips and mass tourism. And then after the First World War, cars started to appear, and that kept the trade going. And every time the trade looked like it was going to die, something else turned up to sustain it. However, it didn't save this place, because this place was a major factory doing big works with a lot of employees, and it lasted about 40 years, and then eventually they had to give up on it and go and base themselves at the Lizard and keep the trade going there. The Penzance company in the Marytown buildings, that also didn't last forever. It didn't last till the 20th century. That closed down, but the tradition in Penzance went on also until certainly my time. There was still serpentine turners in Penzance. There was lots of stone shops and serpentine shops, and people were still making stuff. Some of it was pretty ghastly by then, I must say. It was really things with seagulls attached to it, or little calendars in it, or it was basically trash, but it was still serpentine, and it kept the boys going. And they still are going. There are turners in the Lizard now, very few now, but the trade is still going. I think a lot of you came to my talk in the village.
Yes.
Briefly, the sort of history of what serpentine is a very big mixture of rocks, which, according to what I've read, a massive volcano exploded and created this very large island in the southern hemisphere, and then that came up through all sorts of other strata and brought lots of bits of other strata and mixed them all up together in a great big stew. And then apparently 2 supercontinents nudged either side of it and squeezed it, which made it heat up to several thousand degrees centigrade, and that kind of melted it for the second time. So it's twice cooked. And so all the colours and the shapes and the swirls and everything come from the fact that this wasn't, this was a very disturbed rock formation, and that's why you get flaws in it and different colours and different trends in it. But that's it. It's not. There is serpentine in other parts of the world, but not like this. It's not coloured. It's not very pretty. It's usually dark green. In Australia, there's a stretch of it that goes on for about 90 miles. It's quite common in California. But as a beautiful thing, as a work of art, really, this is where it came from, and this is where it came from, and it still is. And so it's a unique product of this area, and it's a great story.
Where
So
do,
anyway, we'll
where
press
do
on.
Turners get their serpentine now? Do they?
They still quarry.
They still quarry.
They're allowed to
Ah.
quarry. They have to get permission to quarry, and then they have to cover the land afterwards and all that sort of stuff.
So it's small time quarry, not this big.
And they when I was writing this book, it was a while ago now, they all formed a cooperative and they would quarry together, and share out what they got, and then cover that up and work that for a while, and then get some more. His house is up there as well. It's still very beautiful, made of serpentine blocks, and that's way in the shrubbery up on the top there. I think here. I think next to the big buildings. They certainly, they didn't last the onset of the industry, and the fishing all, did move away. You can see what it would be like. You'd have to be pulling the boats up like you do in Cadgwith, and it's not very promising. So they all moved on. Anyway, we'll move on.